Hey, this is Landon. I have created my crash presentation on cognitive dissonance theory. So at work a couple weeks ago, I had a conflict with a customer, and it had me reflecting on some of the things that we've talked about in our communications class. Primarily, it was cognitive dissonance theory that came to my mind because of some of the details of that theory that relate to the conflict that I had with the customer. So for my presentation, I'm going to relay the conflict in addition to analyzing it with the theory, and hopefully give some insight on how it applies, and then close with a conclusion on everything that I've learned. So this picture that you see here is of Leon Festinger. He's most well known for his theory on cognitive dissonance. Leon was from New York City, was the son of two Russian immigrants who migrated to the U.S. prior to him being born. He was born in 1919 and died early in the year 1989. Leon was a very well-educated man. He received a PhD eventually from the University of Iowa, and that PhD was actually in the study of child behavior. So, what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance is when people find themselves doing things that don't fit with what they know, or having opinions that don't fit with other opinions that they hold. So, when there's an imbalance or a contradiction. Previous to being a business major, I was a psychology major, and so this theory was something I was already somewhat familiar with. Definitely a theory that interested me a lot, and this theory is an interpersonal communication theory. Basically, that just means this theory studies something that happens on the inward level of an individual. And so when an individual has opinions that don't add up or don't line up, it creates a feeling of imbalance, and a factor that can help determine how great this feeling of imbalance is or will be is essentially the importance or significance of the issue or the item or whatever the contradiction is happening over. So there are four things that were assumed to create this theory. The first thing that was assumed for this theory is that people have a desire to have consistency in their life, consistency within their beliefs, their opinions, attitudes, behaviors, and inconsistency creates an imbalance. And the imbalance takes an emotional toll. It creates a feeling of imbalance, and essentially people want to get rid of that feeling or shake that feeling. And so secondly, it's assumed that the feeling of imbalance and dissonance, that it's created by these psychological contradictions that can occur. The third thing we can assume is that this feeling of imbalance and dissonance, it motivates people to do something because of how they feel. And so what they do is also assumed to be measurable. And then the final thing that's assumed is that the goal to take action is to reduce the feeling of the dissonance. So I know those seem a little similar there at the end, but those are the four things that are assumed. So to give you some background information on the conflict, I currently am a personal banker. I work for one of the largest banks in the U.S. The customer base is huge. Our customers come from different backgrounds. They have different ideas. So a couple weeks ago, I was sitting with a middle-aged man, and I realized that he had closed his accounts and he had taken his business elsewhere. This had me wondering what he was doing sitting at my desk, but the gentleman, he informed me that the bank had sent him to collections because one of the accounts that he had was closed with a negative balance. And it closed with a negative balance because he had automatic payments set up coming out of his account. And so automatic payments always clear your account even if it will take your account negative. That's just how automatic payments work. And so when the account was closed with the negative balance, he was sent to collections. So after he relayed that information to me, he started getting very angry and aggressive. He raised his voice quite a bit and told me that I needed to put money into his closed account so he could be removed from collections. He told me to do this because he deserved it. And I know that my opinion is biased, especially as I reflect back on this interaction. But I think that he came into the branch with an agenda. And the reason I think this is because he brought up the irrelevant relationship that he had previously owned a bank So therefore, his cognitions were clear on how a bank operated, and he stated that he knew the ins and outs of the bank that I'm employed with. I think that there's a disconnect there. But another interesting thing to note is he also stated that it was unethical for a bank to charge fees. But if he was the owner of a bank previously, he would have to know that a business, in order to grow and thrive, it needs to run itself as a business. It needs an income. And that pretty much concludes the conflict. So overall, the cognitive dissonance theory applied here due to the types of relationships that this customer had between his own opinions. Basically, I can assume that the varying importance of how the gentleman felt and weighed his opinion of the bank can either greatly or minimally affect the dissonance or imbalance that he will or will not feel. So, a few recommendations that I would make to help improve or to improve communication or avoid conflict would be to set aside feelings, which is not always the easiest thing to do. I would recommend to keep relevant information out of conflict. I would also recommend to people that they set aside their differences. Differences are okay, but it can kind of be a gray area where people don't understand each other. And another thing to mention is when somebody has those feelings of imbalance that I previously talked about. So the goal when you have those negative feelings is to have them corrected or replaced with consonant feelings. And so for all I know, the customer may have already had those feelings prior to coming in, and the dissonance was there due to maybe his ethical views on the bank, and he was satisfying that dissonance or those feelings of imbalance by coming in meeting with me and stating how he felt about the bank that I'm employed with. All right, so in conclusion, my presentation covered a few key points. We talked about cognitive dissonance theory. Specifically within the theory, we talked about relevant relationships, dissonant relationships, talked about the feelings of imbalance that can happen when an individual has contradicting opinions or points of views. But I have learned that the psychology of thinking and acting and speaking, it can be complicated. Arguments can definitely arise because of people's feelings of imbalance. Overall, I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thanks for watching.